Welcome to another episode of Wealth Beyond Numbers. I'm your host, Dennis Coral, and we continue the conversation with Eric. Eric, I'm so happy that you're here. You're sharing so much knowledge and obviously things that you've seen in the years you've been in business, helping clients, helping business owners transition to as they grow their business. So I asked our audience as we were preparing for this podcast, if they have some questions for you. And I have a couple that I want to have you help us uncover as a myth. So if I'm a small business, I'm a really small business, I just started, do I really need to have contracts?
Sure. And listen, thank you, Dennis, for having me. And it's really a pleasure. And by the way, this is a really cool studio. So the short answer is, if everything goes wrong and you would be upset, then yes, you should have a contract. If the answer is no, I really wouldn't care, then don't bother. Save your money. And so the purpose of a contract is 50% psychological and 50% practical. So let's talk about the psychology. I believe that if somebody signs their name to a document that says what they're going to do and what the other person's going to do and what each person's expectations are, that then if things start to go sideways, I can point to that contract and say, hey, remember we signed that thing. And I'd say probably 90% of the time, that's going to fix the problem just by itself. No lawyers involved. You just say, hey, remember we signed that agreement and it said that you're going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then 90% of the time, especially if we're dealing with good people, they're going to do what's right. The other 10% of the time, we might need to get a lawyer involved and we might need to go to court, in which case, if I go in front of a judge, I need to make sure that that piece of paper, that document, that contract is going to be enforceable. And I want to make sure that it's to my advantage. So what are some things we want to see? Maybe there's a penalty provision. Maybe there's an attorney's fee clause. Maybe there's other provisions in there that'll handle how we resolve our dispute if we end up in a fight. So again, to answer the question from the beginning, if we wouldn't care, save your money. Just do a handshake, do a text message, do a whatever. But if you would care, and obviously as the numbers start to go up, so if we're doing a deal for $50, we don't need a contract. If we're doing a deal for $50,000, probably need to have something in writing. Because if somebody, doesn't pay me and I've done my part of the bargain, I've offered my services, I've done the right thing, and now they owe me $50,000, I want to be sure that, first of all, I can point to that agreement and hopefully the psychology will resolve itself and they'll be like, okay, you're right, I owe you, let me make a payment or whatever. Or I can go to a lawyer, go to a court and have a judge say, yeah, absolutely, you have to pay the $50,000. So it's a matter of degrees. And it's probably the first thing a business needs. And I think a follow-up question to that is, can they find something online? Can they just download something off the internet? Can they go to LegalZoom? And the answer to all of it is yes. And quite frankly, I'm sure that people are trying to use ChatGPT. Now, let me warn you, just like I wouldn't trust ChatGPT to diagnose an illness, and I would still want to go to a doctor, and I would still want to get a professional opinion, and then I would still want to have somebody run tests, and I would still want somebody to make sure that I'm getting the right medicine and that my body's reacting the right way. It's the same reason why I'm not going to trust everything I read on the internet. And why sometimes it's just a good idea, even if you do your research, you do your due diligence, you do your ChatGPT, you then still, now that you've educated yourself, you still go talk to a professional.
Yeah, I agree. And you touch on so many things, Eric, because ChatGPT does not replace experience.
No.
Does not replace best practices.
Quite frankly, it doesn't think. It's not thinking. Let's all be totally clear on this. We have not actually reached artificial intelligence. All that it does is it has scoured everything that's ever been written on the internet, good or bad, right or wrong. Can I tell a funny ChatGPT story? Okay. So just so you guys all understand, ChatGPT has just read everything that's ever been written on the internet, and then it's a language algorithm that then answers questions because it can kind of understand what you're asking, and then it answers with all of the information it's read on the internet. That's all it's done, okay? So we are in San Salvador, El Salvador, and my best friend, Patrick, he loves ChatGPT, and so he goes to ChatGPT and says, ChatGPT, what's a good one-day itinerary for traveling around San Salvador, El Salvador? And ChatGPT says, no problem, here you go. First you should do this, then you should do this, then you should do this. So the first thing on the list told us to do the teleférico, okay? So we're like, that sounds great. So we get in an Uber and we're like, hey, Uber, we're going to go do the Teleferico. And so the Teleferico takes us. And next thing you know, we're in the countryside. We don't know where we are. We're like on a dirt road on the back of a mountain. And we're like, this is so weird. And we kept asking, Teleferico, Teleferico. And the guy's like, see. And so he takes us to a barn. And there's a lady sitting there by the side of the road. And we're like, Teleferico? And she's like, see, $5. And we're like, okay, $5. So we start walking up a hill, a dirt road. And then a pickup truck comes and they're like, no, you need to get in the back. And we're like, this is so weird. This is not what I thought a Teleferico was. They take us to the top of a mountain, and on the top of a mountain is the ruins of an amusement park that looks like it's been overgrown with the jungle, and it's like something from 50 years ago. And we're like, Teleferico? And they're like, see, it's been closed for 25 years. So ChatGPT didn't know better. ChatGPT literally told us to go somewhere that was closed for 25 years.
Wow.
Which I'm sure must have been wonderful in the 80s, but it was all gone by 2025.
Yeah, that's a great story, Eric. If I'm a business owner, this is a question from our audience, and I get incorporated myself. I have an LLC, I have an S Corp. Does that protect me personally from lawsuits?
No.
Why?
Great example I got for you. Lady calls me up. She's like, Eric, I've got this problem. I'm like, what's your problem? She goes, well, I decided to be a consultant. So my friends were like, hey, it's so easy. You can just create your own LLC. And somebody went and showed me how to do it. And I did it all by myself. I got my credit card. I typed in my address and my name. And next thing you know, I had an LLC. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, what do I do? And I'm like, well, did you get an EIN? They said, what's that? I said, that's the employer identification number issued by the IRS. That is the prerequisite to opening a bank account. They go, oh no, I never bothered to get a bank account. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, I just deposited all the checks in my personal bank account. I am telling you, if anyone out there is listening, that person had no limited liability, none at all. And by the way, side note, LLC, limited liability company, they stole the limited liability idea from the corporation. So let's all be clear that both forms can provide limited liability, the corporation or the LLC, but you've got to keep your assets separated, keep separate books and records, keep separate bank accounts. You have to follow the corporate formalities. Corporations have a whole lot more corporate formalities, but let me play this out for you guys. You open your LLC, you're doing business in the name of your LLC, right? That's important. You can't be signing contracts in your personal name. You got to sign Eric Gros-Dubois, manager LLC, right? You need to write it all there on the signature line. And so you're doing business in the name of the LLC. Something goes wrong. They sue your company, okay? Now there's a lawsuit. You lose the lawsuit. There's a judgment against your company. The company doesn't have the assets to pay the judgment, and now they're gonna get with their lawyer and say, how can I make Eric pay personally? Now, if Eric does his job right, and I properly follow all of the ways to keep the LLC running properly, then they're gonna be out of luck, because the LLC provides limited liability. But the lawyer's gonna say, hold on a second, let's do some post-judgment discovery, because they've already got the judgment, right? So post-judgment discovery isn't, did you do it? Post-judgment discovery is, where's your money? And so they're gonna find out where I bank, they're gonna find out where my credit cards are, and these are all things they'll be able to find out. It might not be immediate, but they can sit me down for a deposition, and under oath, I have to answer the question. Eric, where does your company keep bank accounts? Am I going to lie under oath and perjure myself? So no. So I'm going to say I'm at City National Bank. And then they're going to subpoena City National Bank. City National Bank is going to have to give them all my records. And then they're going to go through my bank statements with a highlighter, and they're going to look for personal expenses. And by the way, I've done this. I've done this to a guy that I was suing. So I'm going through his company credit card and company bank statements, and I'm finding grocery bills. I'm finding restaurants. I'm finding Disneyland. I found a cruise. And basically, I highlighted it all. I made a spreadsheet. I added it all up, and I went to the judge, and I said, Judge, they use their company as their personal piggy bank. Then that means that they should personally be able to pay for the company's debts. And I won. I pierced the corporate veil, and that's what it's called, piercing the corporate veil. So to be very clear, yes, you should all set up an LLC or a corporation. And just so you guys know the math, it's 91% LLC, 9% corporation. That's last year in Florida. 91% of all new companies were LLCs. And there's a couple reasons for that. LLC is actually kind of easier, and it's harder to mess up. I like to do things by the book, so I'm a corporation guy. And for what it's worth, my company's taxed as an S Corp. Either type of form can be taxed as an S corp by the IRS if it qualifies. Basically, you have to have under 35 owners, and all the owners have to be U.S. citizens or permanent residents. Anyways, so my corporation's taxed as an S corp. So if somebody sued my company, I have limited liability unless I personally guaranteed it, or unless there's some other reason, maybe a statute that allows personal liability for the owners. But if I enter into a contract, so let's say I enter into a contract with you, that contract is going to be between my company and your company. And so if there was ever a fight, it would be between our two companies. And since I know you follow all the rules, you would have limited liability and I would have limited liability if push came to shove, we ever got a judgment against each other.
You also wrote my legal document.
There you go.
I love that you brought that subject, because another question from our audience, and this is a topic that I often come across with a lot of my clients that are business owners, is how do I incorporate asset protection? Is there such a thing?
So there is. Now, let's be clear. If there was a magic way to make it so that you could never get sued, I got a great story for you. There was this Cuban immigrant couple. They came to our country. They did great. They own 156 investment properties, mostly Section 8 government subsidized rental properties in Overtown and Little Havana. And they had over 156, and they owned a beautiful primary residence. And they come to me and they said, "Hey, Eric, I'd like asset protection." I said, "Okay." And they go, and I said to them, I said, "Okay, well, here's what we can do. We can reorganize everything because everything's in your personal name. We can set up a number of LLCs. We can have a holding company. Maybe we'll set it up in a Delaware or Wyoming, which are jurisdictions with a lot more privacy than Florida. And so we can have LLCs in Florida owning the assets that are then owned by a holding company in Delaware. Then we can have all of that owned by a family trust that we can set up for you guys." And what I've done effectively is I've added layers. Right? And the asset protection comes from, if I was a creditor, if I was somebody trying to pierce those layers, I would have to expend a lot of energy and I'd have to convince the judge at every layer. I'd have to say, "Judge, I need you to pierce this corporate veil, and then I need you to pierce this corporate veil, and then I need you to pierce this corporate veil." But let me be clear. If somebody had the time and the energy and the motivation, they could do it. It's doable. And really what you're doing is you're adding layers of frustration to hopefully eventually they'll get tired and they'll stop. The famous story is a guy didn't want to pay his wife. They had a brutal divorce. And so he set up a BVI company, which then set up a Nevis subsidiary, which then set up a Montenegro subsidiary, which then had bank accounts in Latvia. I'm not kidding. Took the wife 7 years. She got every penny. But she had to hire lawyers in BVI, then she had to hire lawyers in Nevis, then she had to hire lawyers in Montenegro, and then she had to hire lawyers in Latvia. I'm not kidding. This took 7 years. But, people come to me, they're like, "I want pure asset protection." I'm like, well, first of all, if that existed, I could charge $10 million, right? And people would line up to pay it. But it doesn't exist, right? And so back to the couple, I explained this whole structure and the whole plan. And they go, "Okay, does that mean we won't get sued?" I'm like, "No, that's not what that means. It means that," and mind you, 156 residential tenants, which means they have 156 leases and 156 maintenance agreements and a lot of relationships. And that's, one of my mentors was always saying that it's all about relationships, right? And so if you really don't want to be sued, and I ultimately said, I'm like, "Listen, if your only strategy and your only goal is not to be sued, here's what I recommend. I recommend you sell every single one of those properties. You give all of that money to a financial advisor, and then you lock yourself in your house and you never leave your house ever again. Because every time you walk out your front door, you could get into a car accident. Every time you walk out your front door, you could slip and fall. Every time you walk out your front door, something could happen, which then could result in a lawsuit, right? So if all you want to do is have pure asset protection, like I said, sell everything, stop being a landlord, give all your money to the dentist, and sit in your house and just order Uber Eats and never walk out your front door ever again. Because, if you're going to live and breathe and live in society, then there's a chance you might get sued, which is why, by the way, you know what a more reasonable answer is? A more reasonable answer is you should have a trust. You should have a holding company if you have lots of assets. You should have each of your investment properties in its own LLC. And you should have an umbrella insurance policy, right? You should have a good relationship with an insurance agent. And so for me, of course, I have homeowners insurance, I have business insurance, I have professional liability insurance, and then I have an umbrella policy over my whole life to protect me if, heaven forbid, a worker at my house injures himself or I get into a car accident that injures somebody. I don't plan on locking myself in my house and just ordering Uber Eats. I like participating in society. So, probably a more reasonable answer is have a good structure, have a good plan, and have some good insurance.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great advice. Let's just close with this last question. Why should I get a trademark on my business?
Oh, that's one of my favorite questions. Okay, so, and you'll have to bear with me. There's a little bit of a long answer. Trademark law is, but first of all, really cool. And let's all be clear. Trademark is your branding. It's either your name, your logo, or a tagline that you use. So right here, we've got the name Coral Wealth Management with a little circle R next to it. That is a registered trademark. Free advice, don't ever put the circle R on anything unless you have a federal registered trademark. It's actually a violation of the law to misuse that logo, and that logo is a privilege of membership, right? You have to have a privilege of a registration in order to say you have a registration. If you don't have it, you can put a TM or an SM, that just means trademark or service mark. Then the design, that's a separate thing you can trademark, and then the slogan, Wealth Beyond Numbers Podcast or Wealth Beyond Numbers, that's another thing that you could trademark. So whenever you go out into the world and you're doing business, offering a particular good or service, using a particular branding, you automatically have a trademark. And it's called a common law trademark. And this common law means the law that we inherited when we founded the United States, and we got it from the English. And basically in little old England, they had recognized that if a business is doing business in the name of itself, that other people shouldn't be able to steal that name. And that was just inherent. Like they just got it. They figured that out, and that's the common law. So the problem with the common law is you have more of a burden of proving your rights, and even if you win, you don't get your attorney's fees. Okay, so then if you choose, and it's a choice, and I tell people, especially if you're on a budget or you're a startup, that this is a luxury that maybe you'll invest in later on. And it's something that, you can choose to invest in. You might never choose to invest in it, and you might be like, oh, I don't need that. But if you choose to, then there are two different levels of registration. You can do state registration, which is literally all 50 states. So Texas, Florida, Georgia, New York. Or if you're going to have a nationwide business or a digital business or an online business, you can do the federal and not bother doing the state by state. So I never bothered to do a Florida trademark. I just went ahead and skipped it. I went to the federal trademark, which does nationwide. Now, people ask me all the time, is there a worldwide trademark registry? And there is not. We do not have, contrary to what you might hear on the news, we do not have a globalist society. There's no global trademark registration. And for that matter, and this can be really frustrating, you might literally have to go one by one to every country. So what I recommend is you'd start with your home country, in our case, the United States, and then you say, okay, I'm going to expand to Colombia. You go to Colombia. And then my next one is going to be Mexico, and then Mexico. And then they say, well, if I do Central America, do I really need to do Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala? And I'm like, yeah, you might need to go. So and obviously that's all going to cost time and money. So you're going to go one by one. So like I said, it's a luxury. Now, what do you get for the luxury? First of all, you get the little R. So you get the little R, which is cool. It's branding, and maybe a layperson might be like, ooh, they're serious, right? It makes it look like you're more professional. Second of all, you get to put the world on notice that that's yours. And I like to think of the sword and the shield. So the sword is, if you find somebody else out there that's trademark infringing on you, you can start with a really nice cease and desist letter that says, hey, buddy, I have this federal registration. Here's my registration number. I'm putting you on notice. If you don't stop, I'm going to sue you in federal court, and I'm going to get attorney's fees and damages, okay? And so that can scare away a lot of your competition who might be trademark infringing. And by the way, it's happened to my clients where we've gotten that letter, and my clients were innocent. They didn't know better, and it was a mistake. And they started a company without doing their due diligence. They didn't bother checking the federal registration. And sure enough, a company in Richmond, Virginia, got their lawyer to send us a cease and desist letter. And we had a decision to make. So one of the choices is we tried to negotiate. We tried to negotiate what's called a coexistence agreement, where we're like, hey, listen, we'll stay in Florida. We'll never come to Virginia. And they did not agree. Sometimes they'll agree, but they did not agree. The next one is to fight and maybe say, hey, I don't agree. I don't agree with your argument that it's trademark infringement. And the third one is to rebrand, which can be really, imagine if you found out today you had to rebrand. I'm 13 years into my company, 13 years of Instagram, Facebook, website, business cards, logos, everything. Now in the story for my client, they were 6 months in, so it was it was easier, but they weren't happy about it. Right? They weren't happy about it. And so that's the sword. And then the shield is if anyone ever tries to come after you, you can have peace of mind that you're protected.
Yeah, that's great advice, Eric. And I heard you say that over the years I've known you, but some business owners don't realize that's how important it is. Because when you're growing a business, you're just so focused on growing the business, you don't realize you may have competitors out there in the rest of the country using your same name. Does that mean that you have to have it even if it's a similar industry, or does it, let's say...
Great question. So this is all gray area stuff. This is where lawyers make a lot of money fighting over the nuances. So technically, when you register a trademark, you have to pick what goods or services you're selling. And there's a list of 45 different categories of goods or services. If you ever want to look it up, it's called the Nice Agreement from the city in the south of France, which, by the way, if you've ever been there, it's really weird. They have rocks on the beaches. Like, there's no sand. It's all rocks, like pebbles. In any case, so the Nice Agreement is 45 goods or services. And so category 45, number 45, is legal services. I believe category 40, it's either 35 or 40 is financial services. And so you pick, so let's just say that you want to sell cell phones, t-shirts, and legal services, then you would have to pay for 3 different categories when you do your registration. So there could theoretically be a Coral Wealth Management that is a hot dog stand that wouldn't compete with you, right? That's not a good brand, but for them. And so the argument is, and this is what it comes down to, would an average consumer be confused? And it's all about likelihood of confusion. So would an average consumer be confused that those businesses are related? If an average consumer wouldn't be confused, then there's no risk. And just going back to something you said, we're talking about building brand value. And sometimes that's going to be the most important thing we're going to sell. And there are some businesses where they don't want your people, they don't want your desks, they don't want your chairs, they want your brand. They want your client list and your brand name. And that might be the most valuable thing we have. And
that's amazing that you mentioned that, because when I'm thinking of selling my business, I'm selling not just my clients, it's my brand. The next person that buys it is buying EPGD Business Law and what it represents and the difference that it made on the clients that it helps and supports. So it's your name, it's your reputation, it's not just your
We have a name
clients.
For that in the law. It's called goodwill.
Goodwill.
And when they do a business valuation, again, they can come in and they can add up the value of the furniture, and they can add up the value of the desks and the computers.
I want to close it with that, because our next episode, I really want to get to know now and share that more knowledge about Eric and who you are, and learn more about your practice itself and what led for you to get it going. But hold off on that until our next episode. I hope you enjoy this. It's great information and great knowledge with Eric every time I see him. And I hope you enjoy this episode of Wealth Beyond Numbers. As we like to say at Coral Wealth Management, retirement and financial confidence starts here. Thank you.